Alright, so we're supposed to solve the following quadratic equation using any method. So if you'll remember, we have factoring. Just doesn't work for every type of problem. We have the quadratic formula, which does work for every type of quadratic equation. And the square root property doesn't work for every type of quadratic equation. But if you want, the quadratic formula works for all of them. You just got to identify your A, B, and C. So it has to be in the right form, which means set it equal to 0. Also, your x squared term, let's make it always positive, okay? So I'm going to leave the 3x squared here on the right, and I'm going to move the 8 over, because it's going to make it negative. I'm going to move the negative 10x over, that's going to make that positive, which would give us 0 equals 3x squared. Again, the minus 10x turns plus 10x, the plus 8 turns minus 8. So this is the form it needs to be in, and of course your A is 3, your B is 10, and your C is negative 8. And so when I plug that in, that's x is equal to, remember, negative B, so negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared, which is B squared, minus 4 times A times C. Always take the signs with your A, B, and C over 2A. Check that twice and make sure we've got everything plugged in correctly. So it gives me negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 when I square the 10. Then I multiply all this together. 4 times 3 is 12, and then 12 times 8 is 96. So that's plus 96 over 2 times 3 is 6. Continue simplifying. It gives me x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 196 over 6. Now, sometimes these are perfect squares, sometimes they're not. You've got to be able to handle both situations. So just type in the square root of 96 in your calculator and see what you get, and it's 14. But now, if you get a decimal, that means that you don't write the decimal down there. You need to simplify your square root as much as possible and then go from there. But this one's simplified, which you know what that means. We could have factored it in the beginning. But that's okay. You've got negative 10 minus 14 over 6. Look, that's one of your answers. And then another answer is negative 10 plus 14 over 6. But since this can simplify further, we're supposed to. So negative 10 minus 14 is negative 24 divided by 6, which is negative 4. One of my x values is negative 4, and that would be a solution to this equation. On the other hand, negative 10 plus 14 is 4 over 6. That reduces to 2/3. So x equals 2/3 is a second solution to this quadratic equation. Alright, so 18b, we're supposed to solve this quadratic equation. Now, things that need to happen is it's equal to 0. Okay, if that weren't already equal to 0, that's the first thing I need to do. And then we need to identify a, b, and c if it doesn't factor. Look, multiplies to be the constant, which is negative 3, and adds to be negative 10. Are there numbers that do that? I can't think of any, right? The only thing that multiplies to be 3 is 3 and 1. So you know what? Quadratic formula it is. So we have A, if I get my pen right, stand by. You go ahead and pick them out. So A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 10, and C is equal to negative 3. Alright? So my formula is X. Goodness gracious. X is equal to negative B. So negative of a negative 10 plus or minus the square root of negative 10 squared minus 4 times A is 1. C is negative 3. And that's all divided by 2 times A, which is 1. I got big time pen issues. Okay, so negative of a negative 10 is 10, plus or minus the square root of 100. You know, negative 10 times negative 10 is positive 100. Negative 4 times positive 1 times negative 3 is 12. Y'all be careful with your signs. That is commonly missed when using the quadratic formula is signs. So this is the square root of 112 divided by 2. Now, you know what? The square root of 112 will simplify. So that's 10 plus or minus. I can see that 4 divides into there. You could divide in your calculator and see. But when you divide 4 into there, you realize that's 28 times 7. 28 times 4. Wait, I can't remember. Anyway, 28 is part of it, so 4 divides into there. In other words, what I'm trying to say is 16 divides into 112. So you can write that as 16. There's the 7 times 7 over 2. Why did I do that? 16 is a perfect square, so the square root of 16 is 4 square root of 7 over 2. And remember, there's two ways you can simplify this. You can split it up into two separate fractions, like 10 over 2 plus or minus 4 square root of 7 over 2. Or you can use that little trick that I've talked about right here, where if you can find a number that divides into that v, which is 2, then you can simplify it. So if I did it with the v way, and I'm going to write that result in green so you see, that would be 5 plus or minus 2 square root of 7 over 1. But you could do it this way also. Split each of those fractions, and 10 over 2 is 5, and then 2 goes into 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 7. So you get the same thing. So my two answers are 5 minus 2 square root of 7 and 5 plus 2 square root of 7. Notice my next quadratic equation is not equal to 0. I must get it equal to 0. That's x squared minus 6x. I'm going to subtract that 3 to the left. Minus 3 equals 0. If it would factor, I would, but it doesn't. Look, a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 6, and c is equal to negative 3. Similar to the last problem. So I'll plug it in my formula. It's negative of a negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times a is 1 and c is negative 3, all divided by 2a. Please watch your signs when you do this. This first term squared, y'all, that's never going to be negative, ever. So negative of a negative 6 is 6, plus or minus. Negative 6 squared is 36. Don't lose your square root. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times negative 3 is plus 12, all divided by 2. If I keep going, top of the page, x is 6, plus or minus the square root of 36 plus 12 is 48 over 2. Well, you know what? 48 will simplify. 16 divides into 48, similar to the last problem we did. That's the square root of 16 times the square root of 3 over 2. I keep going. That's 6 plus or minus. Square root of 16 is 4 square root of 3 over 2. And once again, look, we have that situation where those three guys all divide by 2. If you can find a value that divides all three of those numbers, you must do it. So I'm dividing 6 by 2 is 3. I'm dividing 4 by 2 is 2. The square root of 3 stays. And 2 divided by 2 is 1, which means we don't need it. So my two answers are 3 minus 2 square root of 3. And the other one is 3 plus 2 square root of 3. Those are my x values. Example D. I'm trying to get this equal to 0, so I need to add the 4. So I have 9x squared plus 9x plus 4 equals 0. So that's the way I need it. My A is 9, my B is 9, and my C is 4. So here we go. X is equal to negative B, so negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times A is 9, and my C is 4. This is all divided by 2 times 9. I keep going. That's negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. Now I have 4 times 9 is 36 times 4. Probably should be able to do that in my head, but I don't want to. So 36 times 4 is 144. So 81 minus 144, and that's all over 18. So I have x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of, now 81 minus 144 gives me negative 63. Over 18. Is that okay? Sure it is. It's just imaginary. So that's going to be negative 9 plus or minus. That negative means I have an I value, but I can also break down the square root of 63 as the square root of 9 times 7 because 9 is a perfect square, right? So I keep going. That's negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 is 3. So I write that as 3i square root of 7 over 18. Do we have a number that'll go into all three of these? Sure enough, 3, right? So I divide each of those by 3. So that's going to be negative 3 plus or minus 3 into 3 is 1 time, so since it's a 1, I can leave it off. And then 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now, I say you can leave off a 1. Y'all, that's only when you're multiplying like this. If there was nothing there and it went in there 3 times, I'd have to put plus 1. And there's nothing wrong with having a 1 in front of this I, but remember, 1 times anything is just that thing, so that's why I left it off. And if I write these as 2 separate answers, it's negative 3 minus I squared of 7 over 6. And negative 3 plus I square root of 7 over 6. That's my 2 different x values. Now, this next problem, it'll factor. Notice I've only got 2 terms, and those 2 terms have something in common. A 2 will factor out and an x. So if I pull out a 2x, that's going to leave me with, remember I'm dividing each of these by 2x, that's going to leave me with x minus 2 equals 0. And then I set each factor equal to 0. So 2x equal to 0, x minus 2 equals 0. To solve for x here, I divide both sides by 2 and get x equals 0. To solve for x here, I add 2 to both sides and get x equals 2. That's my 2 solutions. And remember, we're always looking for 2 solutions. It could be the same number both times. It could be imaginary numbers. But again, 2 solutions for every quadratic equation is what we're after. Now, if you wanted to, you could have used the quadratic formula with a is equal to 2, b is equal to negative 4. What would c equal? Because there's not one. Well, 0. And I promise you get those same 2 answers. It just take longer. All right, next guy on the list. 1 plus 25 over x squared equals 9 over x. Now, this one's crazy. You know why? It's because it's not a quadratic equation right now. It's called a rational equation. But we can't solve for x's when they're in the denominator. So the rule is you multiply every term by the least common denominator for all of your denominators. Well, y'all, that's x squared. So I'm going to multiply this whole equation by x squared. So 1 plus 25 over x squared equals 9 over x. Every bit of that by x squared. So I distribute. X squared times 1 is x squared. X squared times 25 over x squared. Well, I'm just going to write it down so you can see. And then x squared times 9 over x. Now, that gives me x squared as my first term. Look, these x squareds cancel to get plus 25. And on the other side of the equation, this x cancels with one of those, and I'm left with 9x. Now, there's my quadratic equation. So I'm going to subtract the 9x over. So I have x squared minus 9x plus 25 equals 0. Now, if I could find numbers that multiply to be 25 and add to be negative 9, I sure would in factor, but I can't. A is 1, B is negative 9, C is 25, and now I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So x equals negative of a negative 9 plus or minus the square root of negative 9 squared minus 4 times A is 1, C is 25, and that's all over 2 times 1. I keep simplifying. That's 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. That's going to be minus 100 all over 2. Which gives me 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 minus 100. That's going to be a negative number, right? It's going to be negative 19 over 2. Had to think about that. And that's going to give me x is equal to 9 plus or minus. Now, that negative under square root means I have an I square root of 19 over 2. Now, y'all, you know the square root of 19 is not going to simplify because it's prime. So my 2 answers are x is equal to 9 minus I squared root of 19 over 2. The other one is x is equal to 9 plus I squared root of 19 over 2. You could also write that as 2 separate fractions, like 9 halves minus I squared root of 19 over 2, and the same thing with that one. Now, this problem is similar to our last one. Variable in the denominator, we have to get it out. How do you do that? You multiply all of your terms by the least common denominator, y'all, which is x minus 2 times x plus 2. Okay, so I'm going to multiply this 5 right here times x minus 2 times x plus 2. I'm going to multiply this fraction, this 6 over x minus 2, also times x minus 2 times x plus 2. Then I'm jumping on the other side of the equal sign and multiplying 4 over x plus 2 times x minus 2 times x plus 2. And what good does that do? Well, this x minus 2 cancels with that one. This x plus 2 cancels with that one. So now I have 5 times. Now, y'all, I have to FOIL this out. So x times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Here, I have to distribute that x inside, so that's going to be plus 6x plus 12. And on the other side, I'm going to distribute that 4 inside. It's going to give me 4x minus 8. Now, these cancel. That's helpful. That gives me 5x squared minus 20 when I distribute that 5 inside, plus 6x plus 12. And on the other side, 4x minus 8. Now, that is a quadratic equation that needs simplifying. So let's move the 4x and the minus 8 over. It gives me 5x squared. Now this 6x right here, and I minus this 4x, is going to be plus 2x. You see what I did? I moved that over and subtracted. Now, this negative 20 plus 8 is negative 8, and then I add that over. Hey, that's gone. Am I right? Negative 20 plus 12 is negative 8, and then I add 8 to both sides. Yeah, that's gone. That's helpful. You know why? This will factor. So let's pull out that x. Greatest common factor of x. So it gives me 5x plus 2 equals 0. I set x, each factor separately equal to 0. So I get x equals 0 as one of my answers. I'm going to subtract 2 and divide by 5. And there's my other answer. That's both solutions right there. We're going to get started on the problems in 19. I'll probably have to move over to another video to finish the problems in 19. Or maybe not. Let's see. So we're supposed to find the vertex. So vertex, axis of symmetry. How do you know these are quadratic functions? Find the x-intercepts, the y-intercepts. Open upward or downward, and then finally graph. That's a lot, right? Okay. So to find the vertex, remember what we talked about is to find the vertex, you calculate x is equal to negative b over 2a. Okay, so that's negative of a negative 4 over 2 times 1, because your a right here is 1, your b is negative 4, and your c is 4. So I simplify that, gives me 4 over 2, which is 2. So my x value is 2. How do I find my y value? Well, I have to substitute 2 into my function. I need to find f of 2. So that's 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 4. That's 4 minus 8 plus 4. Well, that gives me 0. 4 minus 8 is negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So 0 is my y value. There's my vertex right there. Okay, now the axis of symmetry is going to be always, I'm going to put it at the top here, your axis of symmetry is always x is equal to the x value of the vertex. So x equals 2, like in this case. How do you know if these are quadratic functions or parabolas before you graph? Well, if you have an x squared, that gives you a parabola. That's how you know beforehand. You have a quadratic equation. Find the x-intercepts. Remember, to find x-intercepts, you set y is equal to 0. That is the harder of the two questions. So in other words, 0 equals x squared minus 4x plus 4. If that factors, hey, it does, multiplies to be positive 4 and adds to be negative 4, that's going to give me x minus 2 times x minus 2. Well, I set x minus 2 equal to 0. I get x equals 2. I only have one x-intercept, and it is 2, comma. Now, the y value, that's what we plugged in, right? 0. So that is my x-intercept. Okay? What about the y-intercept? Well, to find a y-intercept, you let x equal 0. That's always the easiest of the story. So you have y is equal to 0 squared minus 4 times 0 plus 4. Well, that's 0, plus 4, I get y equals 4. So that's the point 0, 4. Does it open upward or downward? You know what? It opens upward. Anytime your leading coefficient is 1, right here, 1 in front of that x squared, anytime it's positive, not 1, but anytime it's positive, the graph opens upward. Then we're supposed to graph the function. So for the rest of these, I might put a nice XY axis on the page, but y'all, I'm going to make this one easy. Okay, I'm just going to draw my own XY axis way down here at the bottom of the page. Now, I've got important points like 0, 4, and 2, 0, and 2, 0 is my vertex. So I'm going to go out to 4 in every direction. If we need more than that, we'll put more than that on there. Okay, now, important stuff. Your vertex has to go on there, so 2, 0. Okay, that's my low point, right? Because this graph opens upward. My Y-intercept is 0, 4. And then my X-intercept happens to be my vertex. Now, watch this trick. Notice that 2 away, 2 to the left of my vertex, I'm up here at 4, which means this is symmetric. 2 to the right, I'd also be up here at 4. So that's another point. 4, 4 on the graph. Y'all, that's enough. Plot 3 points and graph it. There we go. I missed my point right there, but that's what that looks like. All right, come back to the last video for B through the end.